there's no way to approach theory other than to be critical of it. I mean, you've got to understand it first before you can be critical of it. So you have to delve into the books. But once you understand it, then you should critically analyze it and ask yourself the question, is this actually of any use to me? Let me explain. The first thing that I feel we need to think about is to think about any theory by sitting it in the context of the environment, the time in which it was conceived. You can't begin to analyze the things of Freud's ideas if you don't consider the norms of the time. It's easy to be critical if you don't consider that. Some of the things are products of their time. Others kicked against the times that they were part of. So you have to think of Freud in terms of Victorian values. It's the same with Bowlby and attachment theory. It's easy to be critical and say he shouldn't have focused on mothers. Well, of course he shouldn't have. But at the time, it would have been an almost kind of natural thing to do, the way things were, the order of things. We've moved on, so now you have to think of what Bowlby said around attachment differently. And people have done that, and there are things you can read on that. But when you think of his original ideas, you have to sit them in that context. Many of the theories we explore exploded out of post-war times or are rooted in cultural shifts like that occurred in the 60s. In the 60s, we saw the rise of self, which permeated through that era. You became important rather than the group. And then these ideas were molded through kind of the political unrest, I guess, of the 70s and 80s and translated into where we are today. But you have to think about the time the theory was created, at least to start with, I'd argue. Often I feel that theory is applied in a very reductionist kind of way. It suggests the world works in a particular way as though it always does, or at least that's sometimes how it comes across. Maybe it's how we teach it, maybe it's how we grasp it, maybe it's how practitioners apply it. For example, a parent uses drugs, a child goes on to use drugs, well, there you are, then it's learned behaviour. And that has some resonance, but it misses all the other things like poverty, housing, education, and more that contribute to why people do what they do. Because people often don't do what the theory says they should do or might do. So as we tiptoe into thinking more deeply about theory throughout this module, I think we need to keep that in mind. Not be too simplistic. Just because someone famous has written it down doesn't mean it's right. I mean, we have to consider that these things have survived, so they may well have merit, but we need to think critically about them. I say this next bit kind of slightly tongue-in-cheek, but I agree with Nassim Nicholas Taleb. He says this in his book Anti-Fragile, which isn't particularly social working. It's kind of about resilience, I suppose, in systems. He says he was asked by one of his students for a rule about what to read. And he says, as little as is feasibly possible from the last 20 years. He says, and I agree with this part, go back to the original text. Don't use what someone else has written about it. They won't have the passion or the nuanced understanding of the originator. You want to know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Well, read what Maslow said. You want to know about Marxism? Well, read Marx. It's simple as that. That said, there are lots of great books that kind of help us come to terms with what actually, in its original source, can be quite complex writing from the originators. But you see my point. Go back and see what these people said about the things that they proposed. As when we write about things, we interpret them. We sometimes change them. We streamline them so ideas become kind of narrower sometimes, I guess. It's not always a bad thing to kind of reshape things and transform and change things and think about things within the new context. But delve into the original sources where you can. Another word of caution, I suppose we sometimes fall into the trap of taking a theory and applying it to an individual. Karen Healy writes a bit about this. So we fall into the trap of taking a theory and applying it to the individual. So social learning theory says this. So now I'll go and look at the person and, oh yes, look, there's social learning theory in action. Of course, if you start from a premise, from an answer, like the answer is social learning theory, then you're probably more likely to find that as the answer. Explore people in their presentation the other way around. What can I see? What do I observe? And then go to what might help me understand that. So at least that means you start with the individual and look at things from their subjective position, not through the lens of a favorite theory or a particular theory. You know, you're not starting from an answer. Yeah. Individual theories seldom offer a full explanation. It's not by being driven by some big overarching way of being that we support people, but in individual interactions that we have with them. It's how we treat people or how people are treated that fuels behaviour, not some compliance to a particular way born in the 60s, for example, and largely irrelevant in some ways to life in the 2020s. My analogy is if we were still using IT concepts, computer concepts from the days of flower power, we would still be waiting for the machine to boot up. We've changed how IT works and functions, and it's the same for some of these theories that we'll consider. And it's important to consider them. I'm not dismissing that. How we act towards each other, individual to individual, is the root of cause and effect, and everyone's different. Everyone's environment and history is different, so one size doesn't fit all. But it often feels like when we think about theory, we make an assumption that it does. People will fit into this theory. Well, let's start with the person when we're thinking about these theories. Let's start with the person and see which theories then help us explain what we're observing, rather than the other way around. That said, we're going to explore some theory here. Be inquisitive and critical. Don't just take my word for something. Don't even take Bowlby's word for something, or Egan's, or Marx's for that matter. Listen to them and think for yourself. And maybe go and find people who don't agree with these people. It's fascinating. So, what I'm going to ask you to do is write a definition of theory. What do you think theory is? And then share it. There's a link on Canvas underneath this video in the unit for today. And the things that you type will appear on the screen, so we can all have a look at what we all think.